Rev up your engines! Today I'm going to show you how to prevent catastrophic damage in your car. And I have seen so many cars be damaged catastrophically by things that could have easily been prevented. Now the first thing is your brake system, brake fluid. Easy to check. Check it every once in a while. Look inside. See where the level is. Mark it. This one's plastic. You can easily see on the line. Yeah, it's dirty, but when you wipe off the dirt, you can see the fluids right here, and that's perfectly fine. If you find you're losing fluid and you have to keep adding it, just don't keep adding it and think, well, that's okay. There's a problem and you need to fix it before your brakes fail and you get in a wreck. There is one exception. Over time, you're always going to use a little brake fluid as the pads wear down. If you find you're low on brake fluid and you fill it up, and then months later it's still up, that's just normal. You don't need to worry about it then. But if you have to keep adding it, something's wrong. Fix it sooner than later. You lose your brakes when you need to stop at 65 miles an hour. That's dangerous. And speaking of brake systems, and while you're at it, since you're going to jack up the car to look under there, check the suspension for badly worn parts. Grab it. Sideways, up and down. If it goes clunka clunka, there's a serious worn part. Fix it before it breaks when you're driving down the road. I've had customers tow them over here with a wheel hanging off because pieces broke off. That could have easily been prevented by checking it first. So I'll take off the wheel. And as we look inside, here's the rubber brake hose. Now, Toyota makes them good. It's dirty, but even though it's 24 years old, the rubber is not cracked. Check it the whole way up. Now, if you find there's a bunch of cracks, change the hose immediately. You'd be amazed at how inexpensive the hoses are, especially on an older one aftermarket. You don't want to slam on the brake and have the rubber rip and not have any brakes. An easy thing to check, and I mean, this one's 24 years old. It's not cracked yet, but let's say you got a Chrysler product. Well, theirs are a lot cheaper made, and they'll often crack earlier. So you just check them every once in a while, and if they are getting cracked, replace them. And while you're in there checking, look at the caliper. It has seals. If you see it's all wet and there's brake fluid dripping on the bottom because it goes by gravity, it's time for a newer rebuilt caliper. Calipers have rubber seals. They wear over time. But again, this one's 24 years old and it's a Toyota. And it's still not leaking. So they're well made. But check each wheel. And if you see there's brake fluid leaking out, fix that leak immediately. Don't let it go over time, because not only could you have a catastrophic failure of it goes and leaks, and when you step on the brakes they just go and leak and don't have any pressure, but just as bad, they really leak. They get on the pads, you hit the brakes, the pads are now pushing on brake fluid and they're just going to slip. You see leaking in your brake system, fix it immediately. Now, speaking of liquids, your cooling system has what's called a thermostat in it. Very simple device. But if it goes bad, it can shut down, not send any coolant from the engine to the radiator, and the engine will instantly overheat. And hear the saying, out of sight, out of mind? You don't want to forget about it. Yeah, they're hiding away. In this case on a Toyota, it's inside the housing here. Behind all these wires is the thermostat. There's two bolts that hold it in. Do people think about thermostats? No, because they're hidden away. It's a good idea. You keep your cars a long time. They're well made, but if you want to be conservative, every 5 or 6 years, buy a new thermostat. They're cheap. Most cars, they're easy to put in. Now, I mean, some of these German designs are ridiculous, that you practically have to tear the whole engine apart to get to them. And some of the German ones today, this is really insane, they have electric thermostats. Instead of just having a simple metal piece that expands and contracts to open up, they're electronically controlled. And they do cost quite a bit of money. But being in German products, you better change them every 4 years or so. If they go bad and your engine goes, there goes your car. Nobody puts engines in those anymore. They cost so much money to replace an engine in. And when you find out that thermostats cost so little, most cars you can easily change them yourself. Change them out so you're not driving down the road one day and the stupid thing shuts and the engine immediately overheats. Now, of course, if you're watching your temperature gauge closely like I do, you're going to see something's up and pull over, but still you'll be stranded somewhere. But from my experience with my customers, a lot of them don't even look at the temperature gauge. You're not looking at the temperature gauge. You want to make sure that your thermostat is going to last a long time and be working. So heck, every 5 or 6 years, just replace them, or say every 100,000 miles. Most cars, it's not that big of a deal, and if it does go and your engine blows, that's a gigantic deal. And of course, long-term maintenance to stop catastrophic problems with your car. Make sure your coolant stays clean. This particular one is 5 years, 150,000 miles. You don't have to change it all that often, but if you don't, corrosion will eat up your cooling system. Poorly made cars, like older Mazdas, the aluminum heads will actually eat holes in them. And then, even if it blows the head gasket, you can't replace the head gasket because the head's eaten up, and you got to replace the head of the engine too, which is generally more than a car's ever worth. You don't want to destroy your engine and your cooling system with dirty coolant when they last so long, and it's so easy to change them out. And since cooling systems are full of plastic parts these days, it's a 24-year-old car and it's still got a plastic radiator. You want to check all that plastic stuff out. See if it's starting to crack. Because if it's getting cracked, change it before it blows. And the same thing for all the rubber cooling hoses. Check them. They start rotting. You want to replace them sooner than later. I had a customer last year was driving his car. He said he watches his temperature gauge, and he said it never got hot, but all of a sudden he had smoke under the hood, car stopped running, and it blew his engine, even though the temperature gauge didn't get hot. And here's what can happen. If your radiator's plastic and brittle, it gets a big hole and it blows, it can blow the coolant out so fast that the temperature gauge stays right where it was. It could be in the middle, and it's not going to rise, because temperature gauges are kind of strange things in certain situations. And in this situation, if you lose the coolant fast by a giant hole blowing out, it actually won't work with hot air or steam. It's got to be water. Once that water goes out and is replaced with steam or hot air, the gauge isn't going to go to H because there's no water to make it work, and it stayed right in the middle while his engine blew up. So you certainly want to avoid catastrophic cooling system failure. If it goes out all at once, you're on a highway, you can easily blow your engine. So let's say you do watch your temperature gauge and you notice that something weird is happening. It's running warmer bit by bit by bit. Figure out what's wrong with it as soon as possible. Don't continue to drive down the road. Better to be stranded somewhere for a short period of time than to say goodbye to your car because you blow the engine. Now here's something people normally don't think about with catastrophic failure, and that's your car's battery. When I was a young mechanic, batteries are pretty simple. They didn't have alternators, they had generators on cars. Battery went bad, you'd put another one in. It was really no big deal. But modern cars are all computer run, and a battery supplies power to everything. So even if your car starts and runs, a weak battery can be insidiously wiping out the electronics of your vehicle. Now, any mechanic or any auto parts store can check your battery with one of these load testers very easily, tell you what shape it's in. And my advice with that is, say your battery is more than 4 or 5 years old and it shows that it's starting to get weak, change it right away, and then you don't have to think about it for another 4 or 5 years. I have many conservative customers that just change their battery every 4 or 5 years. They're not even going to test it, they just change it and figure, hey, then I'm not going to have any problems. It's really not that bad of an idea, because a battery that's weak or has internal shorts in it, it can wipe out your alternator. It can feed back alternating current and fry the computer. That's why they're called alternators. Even though the car works on 12-volt direct current, it generates alternating electricity, which then go through the diodes of the alternator to create direct electricity. And when those diodes break down, you can get alternating current flowing through the system, which will destroy computer parts in your car. So in this case, the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, doesn't fit at all. If it's getting weak, replace your battery so you don't create very expensive problems down the line with the simple thing of just putting another battery in. Now, the next thing to check to prevent catastrophic problems in your car is your tires. Your car is running on air inside these tires. They blow at high speeds, you got a problem. So check them every once in a while. Keep the right pressure. If they're over or under inflated, you can have problems. Check the sides for cracking, because the ultraviolet rays of the sun destroy rubber. Now, if you drive a lot of miles, generally the tires will wear out before they dry rot. All my tires throughout my life dry rotted long before the tires wore out. So you check for a bunch of cracks. You see a bunch of cracks, time to get another tire before you have some kind of a blowout on a highway and get in serious trouble. Tires aren't much better made these days than they were in my grandfather's day. He lived in Niagara Falls. Buffalo's 20 miles away. In his day, if you went Niagara Falls to Buffalo and back, which was a 40-mile round trip, you might have had 3 or 4 flat tires because the tire material was so poor and the roads weren't so hot either. Today, no, that's a thing of the past, but you still got to check them every once in a while. And yes, modern cars have the tire pressure monitoring sensors on them, so they'll tell you when the tires are starting to get low, which is a good thing when they work. But as they age, remember, the sensors are operated by batteries. Eventually, the batteries run out of power. The sensors don't work anymore. If you got a car that's, say, 8 years old and they're starting to go, you'd have to replace all 8. You can't do it yourself. You have to have a tire machine to take it apart and then buy the sensors and put them in and rebalance the tires. It's a very expensive endeavor. So a lot of people just live with that TPMS warning of the flat tire and check the tire with air gauges instead. So if you're in that position, do check your pressure in the morning, every month or so at least, just to see. And look at it. If one looks squashed, check it immediately and get it taken care of before you're stranded somewhere. And of course, the last and most obvious thing to prevent catastrophic failure in your car is change your engine oil regularly and use the right type of oil. If you don't do any maintenance on your car at all, at least change the engine and oil regularly and use the right type of oil. Because modern engines are very particular the type of oil that they use. Variable valve timing, GDI injection, turbochargers. Using the wrong oil in those things can cause a problem over time. 0 W20 and you put in 10 W30 oil. The engine isn't going to immediately blow up, but over time you're going to get excess wear that's going to lead to engine problems that you wouldn't have if you would have stuck to the correct oil. The engineers designed these things for such oils, so make sure you use them. So now you know how to prevent some serious catastrophic events to your car by a little bit of simple maintenance. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.